Hello, welcome back to not Fallout 76 or even Fallout 4, just Fallout. What I want to talk about applies to all Fallouts, especially future ones. It's about VATS, and more specifically whether VATS has a future in the Fallout franchise, including Fallout 5. I can't answer the last question because I'm not Bethesda, but I've been thinking about this for a while now. And I'm seeing a trend in the way VATS has evolved across the games in the franchise. We can use that to make an educated guess about VATS, and the pros and cons of keeping it versus removing it. Broadly speaking, VATS is a system that allows you to automatically target enemies in combat. The chance to hit is purely based on your character's attributes and skills. Targeting specific body parts allows you to cripple the enemy or cause more damage, but you typically get a smaller chance to hit, to simulate the difficulty of targeting a single limb. This system came from the franchise's roots as an isometric top-down RPG. In games of that type, the only way to do combat is to rely entirely on the character's attributes. A player can't aim for your characters, or choose when to press the trigger for maximum effect, like you can in a real-time 3D game. Systems like VATS are universal to top-down isometric games. Jagged Alliance, XCOM, Baldur's Gate, and so on. They all have some form of the same system. It's just inherent to that type of game. The player chooses what actions are to be taken, but the success of that action is entirely down to the character, their attributes, and their skills. Yeah. If you've played XCOM, you've seen one of your squad miss a point-blank shot. You know exactly what I mean. VATS is simply the nifty name given in later Fallout games to this system for lore and role-playing reasons. A system like this was fine and dandy for Fallout 1 and 2. VATS-type gameplay was the only way to do combat because they were isometric top-down games. But things changed a bit when Fallout 3 came out. Fallout 3 was a landmark in many ways. One of its biggest features was that it moved the game into the 3D world. Bethesda could have chosen to remove VATS at that point, but I think they kept it as a bit of fan service and a link to the older Fallouts. But that meant that in effect the game had two combat systems. Players now had the choice of whether to play the game as a first-person shooter, in other words, manually aiming and firing your guns, or they could use VATS to pause the game and queue up attacks as if the game was still isometric turn-based. Fallout 4 kept the same system of calculating success through your character's abilities, with some changes, including making VATS only slow down the game instead of pausing it. VATS became a partly real-time system. Fallout 76 has taken that a step further by removing the slowdown altogether. Your chance to hit is still based purely on your character's attributes, but the action takes place entirely in real time. In effect, VATS is an auto-aimer. Part of the reason for going fully real time is that the game is a multiplayer game, and you can't slow down the game just for one player. But it's also a continuation of the trend we've seen across Fallout 3 and 4 towards a fully real-time system. Now look at the next game from Bethesda. In Starfield, VATS is now entirely absent. There are some abilities that allow you to slow down time, but you still shoot like in an FPS. To be fair, Starfield is an entirely new franchise, but at the same time, shooting guns in Bethesda games has pretty much always had some kind of VATS system. So this does mark a pretty big departure. Given this, there seems to be two paths that Fallout 5 could take. Either keep VATS like in Fallout 76, or remove it like in Starfield. If we think of Starfield as the next step in Bethesda's evolution of the concept, you can see that the developers are clearly wanting to move towards removing VATS altogether. But is that a good thing? Let's take a look at some of the aspects that might need to be considered. One of the most critical choices is whether you want Fallout 5 to lean more towards being an FPS or an RPG. FPS games are about combat first and foremost, and the player's skill is by far the most important aspect of the game. Your character, such as it is assumed to be fully competent, if not superhuman, at everything. So you're the Doom guy or Blazkowicz, some kind of elite super soldier. This character can use pistols, rifles, shotguns, rocket launchers, and miniguns with perfect ability. If the player has enough skill, then the character will do exactly what you're commanded to do. Basically, player skill is what limits what you can do in the game. On the other hand, RPGs are traditionally more about character attributes, and by default, characters are bad or mediocre at everything. As you play, characters will improve their abilities based on your choice of what to focus on. But in RPGs, no character can become great at everything. It's more typical to specialize in one area. So you might be great at melee, but terrible at stealth. You might be great with rifles, but terrible with heavy weapons. Although the move to 3D worlds has brought player skill into RPGs, seeing your character hit an enemy, but still counting as a miss, like in Morrowind, is not acceptable to many players in 3D games. So a player that's great at the game can make up for the character's lack of ability. For example, I'm pretty good at KCD's sword combat, even at low skill levels. But the point is that the character's attributes will play a heavy role in how well you perform in combat. Up to now, VATS allowed you to choose between the two approaches in Fallout games. For long-range sniping, manual shooting tends to be more effective. The player can make up for the character's lack of abilities by choosing where to aim and when to press the trigger. Up close, VATS is usually more effective, as long as you have action points. You can easily go for headshots. The chance to hit is lower, but you do double damage, and if you're close enough, the chances will be good. Add criticals to that, and you significantly increase how much damage you do. And you don't have to aim. If you play Fallout 76, you know that you can just activate VATS, keep the spacebar pressed to spam criticals, and just shoot. You don't even need to know what enemy you're attacking. If it's targetable in VATS, then it's okay to kill it. But looking at the trend, it seems Bethesda's leaning more and more towards FPS type gameplay. In some ways it makes sense. FPSs are some of the biggest games around, especially in the online space. Fallout 5 being more FPS would cater towards that type of player. And Bethesda owns both ID Software of Doom fame and Machine Gun Games of Wolfenstein fame. There's plenty of FPS expertise to draw on. From that perspective, it seems natural for Fallout 5 to do away with VATS altogether. But such a move would also leave behind the traditional Fallout fanbase. Like it or not, VATS is an established system within Fallout. Even players that never played the early isometric games are familiar with it. Even Fallout 76, an online multiplayer Fallout, includes VATS. In many ways, VATS is part of what makes Fallout, Fallout. Some people may dislike removing VATS just because it's a change, and change always tends to draw resistance. Especially in a much loved and established franchise like Fallout. But besides the attachment to the system, VATS also allows Fallout to cater to players who may not be good at FPS games. In particular, older players who simply might not have the twitch reflexes anymore and may be relying on VATS to still be effective in combat. Moving to a pure FPS system may risk leaving part of a loyal fanbase behind. On top of that, would a Fallout FPS be more appealing than a Call of Duty? Or a Stalker game if we're talking about similar slower games? There's some serious questions to be asked about that. You're looking at a possible gain in new players, but at the risk of losing some of your existing loyal fanbase, as well as changing the nature of the franchise. Based on how the system has evolved, I expect that if it does stay, then it will be very similar to Fallout 76's version. In other words, auto-targeting, but still real-time. Going towards a more FPS-heavy gameplay also devalues attributes. Think about the shift in Skyrim versus the older Elder Scrolls games. Out of all the reasons why someone might like Skyrim, I've come across precious few who actually see the loss of attributes as a positive change in Skyrim. Removing attributes from role-playing games takes away from the choices a player can make. An RPG is about choosing what your character will be like. And one of those choices is whether your character is a warrior focused on combat, or maybe a scholar focused on knowledge, or even a fast-talking bard, to name a few archetypes. Sure, you could simply exclude combat attributes and still retain the attributes affecting the other RPG aspects of the game, like charisma and speech for example. But if you lose the impact that combat-related attributes have on the game, that changes the balance in how the game plays. There's few people who consider Skyrim an RPG, at least when compared to previous Elder Scrolls or more traditional RPGs. And if we're being frank, it's more accurate to see it as an open world game, where exploration of a detailed world is one of its biggest selling points. You can make a legitimate argument for saying that Skyrim and Bethesda games overall are a separate genre now. The Starfield attempted something similar to Skyrim, but without the emotional investment that the fan base has on the Elder Scrolls series, Starfield simply wasn't able to engage the player base in the same way as Skyrim did. Even if the gameplay of Starfield follows much of the same template as Fallout and Elder Scrolls games, it just wasn't the same. Unfortunately, there is a clear trend in Bethesda games towards devaluing attributes, so we should be prepared for some bad news when it comes to Fallout 5. One of the knock-on effects of having both FPS and VATS as combat options is that the game has two almost completely distinct combat systems. There's very little crossover between the two. In fact, it tends to be the case that you want to specialize in one or the other. For example, in Fallout 76, criticals only happen in VATS. If you don't use VATS, then the luck attribute and many perks under it are not that useful to you. The same goes with action points. If you use VATS, then you want a lot of them, so you maximize attributes like agility and maybe get perks that increase your refresh rate. If you don't use VATS, then action points are more about how long you can sprint. You're better off investing in different attributes. Different weapons also shine in different situations. A big one in Fallout 76 is railway rifles. The automatic piston is a must if you use VATS, because it negates the ridiculous recoil. But if you don't use VATS, then the rail rifle should only be used as a single shot weapon, because the recoil is not manageable without VATS. Same with shotguns. Outside VATS, they lose their effectiveness very quickly as you level up and enemy resistances increase. But criticals bypass much of that resistance, so shotguns are very effective in the endgame if you use VATS. In contrast, heavy weapons tend to be much better outside VATS. This split in the combat system continues on to legendary properties. There's many that only work with one style or the other. For example, an effect that works when you're aiming down sights only works outside VATS because you can't aim down sights in VATS. Or an effect that reduces the cost of criticals only matters if you use VATS. This split is almost foundational to the Fallout series now. Everything you do in combat, and things like perks and equipment that affect combat, experience this split. It's to the point that removing VATS from Fallout 5 will require a major restructure of how the game works. As an aside, VATS is also why PvP combat in Fallout 76 is not very interesting. Because you have an auto-aim, it seems that success in PvP comes down to what equipment you've got, and how quickly you can spam nuclear quantums to heal and spam criticals. That's not very interesting, and if Bethesda wants some type of online PvP in the future games, VATS would have to go, or at least be heavily modified. But going back to the previous question we asked, what makes the Bethesda FPS better than the already established FPS games like Call of Duty? And would that even be a good thing? I think it comes down to what Fallout is. If you were to ask me, I don't think Fallout players are playing Fallout because of the combat. Combat undoubtedly plays a part in Fallout, but I would argue that Fallout is more about exploring and interacting with the world and the lore than about how quickly you can kill bosses. RPG aspects like attributes also play a key role in allowing the player to express themselves by the characters. Pushing combat to the forefront devalues much of the other aspects of Fallout. From the way VATS has evolved in Fallout 3, Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, as well as Starfield, it looks like Bethesda would like to eventually remove VATS. Like I said before, they have ID and machine gun games to give them the best possible guidance in getting good FPS mechanics in a Fallout game. I'm personally not a fan of the split in the combat system that you get between VATS and no VATS, but at the same time losing it seems like a reduction of choice for players. I'm pretty sure that there's plenty of players that rely on VATS to be successful in combat, and they'd be disadvantaged if VATS were to be removed. Maybe even pushed away from the franchise. The loss of importance of attributes that you get by going FPS would also degrade the role-playing experience on the whole. Attributes, and how the player chooses to emphasize them, plays an important part in a character's makeup and how they interact with the world. Losing that ability to express a character would make such a game a lesser role-playing experience. So despite the things that I dislike about VATS, I'd say that losing VATS and the knock-on effects that that would have on the franchise would lead to such a game being less Fallout than it should be. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Feel free to leave a like, subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when new videos come out. See you soon.